Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I am super excited for today's episode. It's with a Calgary-based yogini named Randelle Lusk. And Randelle teaches at the Yoga Passage as well as Junction 9 in Calgary. She's also a 4th Street Lululemon ambassador. So if you're in the Calgary area and you haven't practiced with her, definitely go check her out. And we had a really great conversation kind of just about the progression of her career through the yoga industry, and just talking about how, somebody who doesn't really have a business background has been so successful owning a studio and teaching at various different studios and becoming a ambassador for Lululemon. It was just really cool to hear the progression of her career and teaching festivals, workshops, retreats, that sort of thing. I really felt like talking to Randelle that she kind of has what a lot of us are looking for as yoga teachers, is this balance between a studio life that's sustainable for us because we're not teaching too much, but we're also able to have yoga be our full-time job. So if that sounds like something you're looking for, this interview is right up your alley, and I won't share anything more. So here is Randelle. I've got Randelle with me today, and I'm super excited to be talking about your career as a yoga teacher. And you're joining me from Calgary. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Amazing. Well, I'm really excited to have you here today and to be just having a conversation about the business of yoga.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is an exciting opportunity to be able to share with you and your listeners.
Yeah, of course. I was wondering if you could start by giving a bit of background of how you first got into yoga, how you first started practicing.
So initially I started practicing yoga because I was running mountain races, like running races, and my body was just really beaten up from that. And so I started doing yoga as just an addition to my training regime to help stretch. And so I was going like once a week here and there, and that was when I was still living in BC, and I moved to Calgary, I think in 2008 or something like that, for my corporate job. And it was very stressful for me at that time with the economy not being very good and its inter-office politics and just generally not being very happy with what I was doing with my life. So my chiropractor had recommended that I do more yoga to deal with some ongoing issues that I was having from my running training days. So I started going to yoga more regularly and realized that it wasn't just helping with my physical rehabilitation, but also it was helping me cope with the stress that I was dealing with at work and just like stress from life in general. And then I started to realize that it wasn't just like helping me deal with stress and helping me deal with injuries and making my body feel better, but I started to make better decisions and was better able to prioritize what I was doing with my time, and just with like my mental health was getting better. So it just started to snowball from there. I took a 30-day challenge while I was still living here in Calgary, and I really stuck to that, and my practice started escalating. The more I practiced yoga, the more the benefits started to escalate and things started to shift for me. And it started to become a spiritual practice for me, even though that was something I was very resistant to because of different fears that I had been carrying at the time. But really, it changed my life from being this very physical practice into something that was like seeping into my day-to-day, into all of my decisions, into how I was responding and moving through life. And it really became like this refuge for me in the storms that I was going through.
That's amazing to hear. I feel like I had a really similar sort of path into yoga as well. Like
it started as, just something I did a little bit like irregularly just to stretch my body because I was working out a ton. And then it's like, the more I did it, the better I felt. And I was like, okay, I need to like do less of the other stuff and more of this yoga thing because I feel amazing physically and mentally when I do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I was this person who was always very physical and athletic throughout my entire life. And I loved playing sports, but the competitive side to sport was very, I don't want to say aggressive, but it was stressful for me. And there was always this underlying message of I had to be better. I had to do more. I had to compete at a higher level. And I always pushed myself. And I'm naturally a competitive person, more with myself than anybody else. And so yoga was this method of turning out of the competitive mind and just turning into allowing myself be who I am and allowing things to unravel how they're meant to be. And so it became this really fascinating outlet where I could still be very physical and still really and further my understanding of my body and my body's intelligence while eliminating the competitive edge and eliminating the negative, or at least quieting the negative talk that could creep in and just letting things be.
Yeah, definitely. I can 100% like understand that. And I've felt the same thing, which is really, really cool. And then at what point did you decide to take your practice from simply a practice and become a teacher?
So I remember specifically one day I sat up from Shavasana, and I was this really shy person and at this time, and I'd always practice in the front corner of the room so that when I would sit, so I could kind of sketch out this idea in my mind that I was in the room by myself and that nobody could see me if I couldn't see them. And so, but I remember sitting up from Shavasana one day and having this feeling of connection and to like connection that I had never felt before. And it was like, now I would describe it as like a connection to God or to myself that I had never had. And it was a feeling where I was like, holy, like, oh my God, I belong somewhere. I exist and I belong here. And so I didn't realize at the time that it was about teaching, but that feeling, that click, it's like a switch went on in me, and it stayed with me. It stayed with me since that day. But if I fast forward from that day to about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 months later, maybe 6 months later, I had left Calgary and I'd moved back to BC. And again, this is when the economy wasn't very good at that time. And I had moved back to BC and ended up unemployed. And I didn't see it coming. It kind of blindsided me. And so I had a few months back in my hometown where I was unemployed and I just felt like completely directionless. And one thing that I recognized quite quickly is that there was no yoga there, and there was no yoga studio, I should say. And so for me, I realized that if I was going to stay there, that I had to be doing yoga. And so if there was no yoga studio, if there was no like real yoga space other than gym settings, then I'd have to create it for myself. So at that point, it was just something that kept coming up for me of like, go and do your teacher training. Just go, just go, just go. And it was something that was like keeping me awake at night. And it was stirring something in me that I couldn't ignore. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. And so I just made the decision that I was tired of waiting for somebody else to give me direction in my life, and that I wanted to take the reins back. And so I booked my teacher training. And before I went away from my teacher training, I had started building a business plan for this yoga studio that I trained up. And and I just like, I knew that it was something that my hometown needed. It was something that I needed, and I knew how powerful it was for me. And it was something that I felt like it was, I mean, it sounds cliche, but I felt like it was my call to do this. So I just went forward with it.
That's amazing. And so you went away, you did your teacher training, and then when you came back, did you start your yoga studio?
So I went away and did my teacher training. And before I left for my teacher training, I started finding places and telling people that I was doing this and trying to find places I could teach at. So my accountant hired me to start teaching to her firm when I would return from Costa Rica. And I also met with this woman who owned a local coffee shop, right in the center of town. And it was this beautiful space, and she was just a little older than I was, and an entrepreneur. And so when I approached her about it, she was thrilled to see that I was pursuing a business and wanted to support me. So when I got back from my teacher training, the next day I started teaching in the basement of my accounting firm. And a couple of days later, I had already scheduled, pre-scheduled teaching in this cafe. And so I started out with, 2 nights a week teaching in this cafe. So I'd have to clear the tables aside at night, wash the floors, set up for the class, and then put the room back together. And so that was how I started. And so I did that for, I think, about 7 months, maybe 6 months. And before I found my own commercial space and then transferred the classes into an actual studio setting.
Wow, that's such a cool story. And it's so neat to hear how supportive your community was. That somebody's I'm an entrepreneur. I get what that's like. Here, you can use my space when we're closed.
Yeah, it was really incredible because where I'm from and where the studio is at, it's a town called Fort St. John. It's in northern BC, and it's an oil and gas town. So it's in the service sector of oil and gas. So there's a lot of money to be made there, or not so much right now because of the current state of the economy, but there was a lot of money to be made there. So people weren't, if they were starting businesses, they were starting oil and gas businesses. That was the trend, and that's where people were making their money, right? And so it's a very male-dominated industry there. So for us, when I talk about us, I mean myself and this woman who owned this cafe. It was we leaned into each other in supporting women in business, and we also had a couple other friends. One's a pottery artist, a ceramics artist, and another one who's a musician. And so we were all business owners, and that's what drew our friendship together, was the fact that that's how we met each other, was the fact that we were all business owners, and that was the hub of our community. And then we met more business owners, and it just our network grew out from there. And it was this really, really rich, unique community in this far northern small town. And we were unusual people there because we weren't in oil and gas, but it was a really fun experience, very, very rich experience.
It sounds like you had solid support from your community too. And did you get other people really interested in yoga? Were people craving the practice?
Well, it's funny because on one hand, people were really supportive, but on the other hand, people thought I was crazy because I had an oil and gas job and I had a career, and I left it. And people really, I went to the bank to get a loan, and they wouldn't give me a loan because they're like, this is Fort St. John's. There's no yoga here. You need to go back to work, basically. So I just fundraised my own startup fees. But there was where I found people were most supportive. Initially, there was of course, like people that I've known my whole life because I'm from there. My family is from there. My grandparents helped, homestead the city. So there's deep roots there, but the really big supporters and the people who really, really dove into their practice there were the young professionals that were coming from all over Canada to work there. So because the industry of what it was, and it was like this northern community where people got their start at. So people would come from all over Canada, professionals or non-professionals, people who are working in the service sector. They would come there to work and to make money and to basically build their resume so they could move back to bigger centers to have, jobs as doctors, lawyers, teachers, you name it, right? So we'd have people come from all over Canada and come into the studio. And because the winters can be so harsh up north, and there's not a ton of extracurricular activities, people really get serious about their yoga practice. They're there every day.
Yeah.
And because it's a huge outlet for them, especially in the winter. And then so that helped to bring depth to the community. And, it's a small studio, but it had it still has a very strong community feel to it, even to the point where there's this First Nations lawyer that was coming to town from Victoria. He visited there quite regularly for work, and he said to me after about a year or two of coming to the studio, he said, I've traveled all over the place. I've done yoga all over Canada, and he's like, this is the best studio I've ever been to because the community feeling is so strong. And I thought that was such an incredible thing to hear.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing, especially after like the struggles of trying to build the studio up, like going to a bank and being like, hey, can I have a loan, please? And then being like, no, you should just go get a real job. It can be so discouraging.
Totally. And I don't know business. I mean, I didn't go to school for business. I was in oil and gas. I was in land. I mean, there is definitely a business aspect to that career, but not in not an entrepreneurial avenue as far as my education background went. So I can't really blame the bank for not giving a loan.
Was there any part of you that was like, maybe I should just give up on this dream and go get a job in oil and gas?
You know what? No, it's funny because I had a lot of people questioning me, my family included. And my family, I love them dearly. They've always been very supportive of me and whatever I want to do with my life. But this was a big question mark for them because I had this career that I went to school for and I was educated with. And, I had worked in Calgary and da-da-da-da-da. And so there was definitely times where the questions were coming up constantly. But it was something that was just like the pull inside of me was just so strong that I couldn't ignore it. There's no way that I could ignore it. And it was something I had never felt that lit up about anything in my life. And so to me, I was like, I have to do this. It doesn't matter if I fail. And, I was constantly reminded of by so many people, the stat that, I don't know, I'm going to pull this off the top of my head, but 90% of businesses fail within the first year.
Yeah.
Like, well, okay, I'll sign a lease for 1 year and see what I can do. So no, it was just something that I knew that I had to do it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It was in me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love hearing that because I think as I've sort of separated from the corporate world and kind of taken this unconventional path in my life, and I have this business degree that I feel like a lot of people are like, you could have, a good oil and gas job in Calgary. And I mean, maybe not right now because so many people have been laid off, but it's like, yeah. What are you doing? Why are you teaching yoga and traveling the world? And I'm like, I don't feel called to sit in an office. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes, absolutely. It's funny how moving back to Calgary, I've been here for almost 3 years now. And when I lived here before and I worked in the corporate world, I didn't like Calgary. And I'll full-heartedly admit that. I was not happy here. But I wasn't happy. I wasn't doing what I was meant to do. And now that I'm back here and teaching yoga and part of that community, not just the yoga community, but the Calgary community in general, I love it here. It's like night and day. And it matters because it's what I'm doing. It makes it's an entirely different life now.
Yeah, that's cool to hear, because I think that, like, I went to university in Calgary, and then I spent a couple of years working there after, and then I moved out to Canmore in 2014, and I've lived like on and off there for a couple of years. And I've kind of thought of Calgary as a space for myself where I have to get this like corporate job, or I have to work in oil and gas or something like that. And it's neat to hear. I mean, I know that there's a cool like yoga space there and that sort of thing, but it's cool to actually hear from somebody that you can enjoy Calgary in that regard.
Yeah, I love this city. Like, I know I've only been here, like, really living here for 3 years. I say, like, now I'm actually living here, but it's definitely, like, it's home for me. And there's great people here. There's fantastic yoga. There's things to do. We're close to the mountains. There's rivers that run through. It's a beautiful city. Yeah,
definitely. And you kind of mentioned before how you didn't have really like a business background, but you were able to start this studio that is still running now. Do you have any like business lessons that you learned, or any tips for listeners that you learned through that experience?
So when I started the studio, I said, like, I went to the bank and asked them for a loan. I went prepared. Like, I built a business plan. It wasn't, I'm sure that if anybody who was educated in business, if they looked at it, they'd be like, it's okay. It's like a good start maybe, but it definitely wasn't like professional. It wasn't tight. But I did the best I could from researching and thinking out a plan of every single aspect that would have to go into the studio. And so when I built this business plan, I took it to my accountant, and because she had started her own firm, accounting firm. And so she was somebody that I really trusted in. And she had said to me, she's like, I love your idea, and I love that you're so eager to get on this and that you have such a vision for it. But she said, do what you can with what you have and start small. And that was something that really, really stuck with me, because I had this grand vision of the studio space that I wanted that would have, like all these like niche little things to it. And I had it painted as a picture in my head, but that picture would have cost me way more money. It would have taken me more years, more time to build into that financial space to have a commercial space for this yoga studio. So I scaled back my idea, and which allowed me to go forward with it without outside funding. So it was just out of pocket to start it up myself, right? And so had I just stayed with this grand vision, and I mean, the grand vision was beautiful. I still remember it, but I'm really happy with the smaller studio that I built and that I ended up with. And because it was manageable, it was something that I didn't, it took a lot of work, and especially in the first couple of years, certainly it took tons and tons of work, but it was something I could manage on my own. And it was something that, after 4 years in, I was able to move away from it and not have it control my life, right? So I had a great sense of freedom after a few years. Once the studio was, the foundation was set, I was back in a space of freedom where I could continue to live the life that I was meant to live. And because the business side of things, I like the business side. I loved running the studio and starting it up. It was very fulfilling, but I love teaching. Like, that is where my gift is. It's in teaching. It's not in running a business. I'm okay at running a business, but there's people out there who are better at running a business than I am. So that was a big one for me. Is just like scaling back so that things can survive and be very manageable. And then another thing from another friend of mine, she had her own business as well. And she had said to me, said, Randelle, you're going to make mistakes and you have to go to sleep. And you have to let them go and start fresh the next day. And you do make mistakes. You're always going to make mistakes, but you're going to learn from the mistakes as long as you don't hold on to them, as long as they don't fester within you of always turning your brain into an idea that you're just making mistakes. Because you're making a lot of decisions as a business owner, whether it's a brick and mortar business or a business that you run out of your own home. There's so many decisions that are to be made that you're going to make a mistake here and there. And you just have to be accepting of that and ready for it. What else? I think when it comes to running a business, a yoga business, is that you have to go back to the philosophy and you have to constantly check in with that. And I've had a few mentors in the past and people that have advised me with business, and they think that that's kind of ridiculous because there's been certain circumstances where I've lost business deals or I have come out with not as much, not as financially secure as I could have had I been more cutthroat. But when you're running a yoga business, your product is yoga. So if you're not running according to your product, then you don't have anything to sell. So the philosophy is the base of the business. It's the base of our practice. So if you're teaching one thing but acting in another way, or if you're just teaching the philosophy and you're living the lifestyle within the philosophy, but the avenue of business, your livelihood doesn't reflect that, then it kind of rots things a little. So always check back into the philosophy. Then you'll always be very sure-footed with your intention.
Yeah, I think that that's a great piece of advice because I think that there's a disconnect around business and yoga because people think okay, there's yoga and the spiritual aspect and all this yoga philosophy, which is great. But then there's business, which is cutthroat and all about money and all about making money. And I feel it's not as black and white as people sometimes divide it in their heads. You can kind of meet in the middle and find this balance between allowing yourself to be financially stable and to create a sustainable teaching career for yourself. But then you can also still embody the philosophies of the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, as long as you're aligned with your path and aligned with your purpose, everything you need in life will come to you because that's how it works, right? That's what the philosophy speaks to. So if as a business owner, somebody who's in the business of yoga, if you're acting in fear with the idea of scarcity, that's what provokes people to be cutthroat and to be sharks, right? Is fear and scarcity. But what we need in our lives when we are aligned with our path will come to us. So that is, you have to change the perspective to trusting in abundance. And abundance it's not just financial abundance, but there's spiritual abundance, there's abundance in wisdom, abundance in love, and so on. So if we continue to step in that path of trust and continue to align with what we're meant to do, then what we need will come to us. So, but if you're not aligned with the philosophy, you're not aligning with your path. So that's when scarcity, becomes a stronger feeling, right? So yeah, I really, really think that running your business along the lines of philosophy is very, very, very doable. It's a matter of keeping your intentions in check. And it's also, being aware of attachments and being honest about what you want for your business. I know for me, I partnered in a studio out here in Alberta. That's how I ended up back here. And the intention was good behind it, and I fully believe that I was meant to come here, and that was the strategy, the universe's strategy on getting me to Calgary. And that business, at one point, I was working so hard at the studio, but I didn't like it, and I kept lying to myself that I could make it work, and I just kept going in that direction of like, if I work harder, it will work. If I do this, it will work. If I try this, it will work. And I was beating my head against the wall because I was being dishonest with myself. I did not want that studio. And when I finally accepted that and came into the truth about that and let it go, I started to understand that why the psychological attachments were there, and I was able to dismantle them. So when I let go of that studio, completely free to start moving back in accordance with my path and where I was meant to go. So, and abundance started to flood back in again.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about too, because it's kind of like I think in all aspects of life and in all careers, but, you know, particularly speaking to yoga, there's a lot of like, oh, maybe I should do this. Maybe I should like this more. Maybe this should be what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we get stuck in like what we should be doing as opposed to connecting to what's actually there. Like, what are the feelings that are actually there, and being like, I really hate this. Like, maybe I should let this go and let somebody come in who's going to like really love it and nurture it and be really passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And however, I do think I've had the experiences on, like, I 100% agree with that. Absolutely. But I have had a few experiences where I will convince myself that I'm shoulding about it. Like, oh, I should do this, so I shouldn't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But then there's a couple of those experiences where I felt hesitant, but it wasn't actually an intuitive hesitation. It was a fearful hesitation. And once I actually came into it, it was like, oh, I was fearing this because it's going to shake my life up, or it's going to provoke change in my life. It's not easy, but I was meant to do it.
Right? Yeah. So and you definitely have to find that balance.
Thing. Yeah. So it takes a ton of introspection to know when to stay and when to walk away.
Yeah, definitely. And so did you sell the studio in Fort St. John to come back to Calgary?
No, I still have that studio. It's like ran by the teachers and manager there, and I go back to run teacher trainings and check in here and there, but mainly I'm here and like traveling elsewhere.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And so coming back to Calgary, what was sort of like, where did your career sort of take you there?
Like, how did I come back to Calgary?
Like, you came back to Calgary and you said you were kind of partnered with another yoga studio, and then that wasn't really your path. So how did you get from that point to where you are now?
So when I had come back to Calgary, it was only supposed to be for 6 months while we got things up and running smoothly. And but I met one of the managers, Keatley, from Lululemon on 4th Street.
Yeah.
And she wasn't a manager at that time, but we became friends. And she started to invite me to Lulu things. I started teaching their community classes, their karma classes. And our relationship just began to develop, and I started to meet more and more people. And it was happening so quickly that after my 6-month temporary term here in Alberta, I was like, I don't want to leave. I'm going to stay. And so I decided to stay, and I started teaching at the Yoga Passage. And then Keatley introduced me or connected me to Jelaine and Kaylee Badeau, who own Junction 9. And so that was before they were done construction on that studio. So I was connected to them, and we met, and they decided to bring me on. So just like all of these opportunities were opening up for me. And the opportunities were opening up for me in the connections that I was making with people, but I was also like trying to put down my own tracks of like other venues I could teach at, and trying to, I kind of approached it the same way I had approached starting up in Fort St. John, with like going into unconventional spaces, or like I taught for the Market Collective for a period of time during their market seasons. And I don't know, I just like made more relationships. I go to the Market Collective. I would talk to artists because those were my friends when I was back in BC. So I was like, I know these people. I know this type of people. I talked to them. I talked to yogis, and just started to build this community. And in that community, you make these connections because Calgary people are friendly and they want to connect with each other and they want to work with each other. At least that's how I found it. Mm-hmm. So over time, I just started taking on more public classes between Junction 9 and Yoga Passage. And then I was brought on with Lululemon as an ambassador a little over a year ago.
Amazing.
Yeah, it just really snowballed.
Cool. And was being a Lululemon ambassador something that was in your goals?
Yes. So I laugh because I remember when Lululemon first came out, I was in post-secondary school, and I lived in like remote northern BC. So this is before online shopping or anything, like online shopping through Lululemon. It was the start of eBay, I think. Yeah. And I found Lululemon online, and I saw that they had these ambassadors, and I was like, wow, that would be so amazing to be, cause like as an athlete growing up, I always thought it would be amazing to be a sponsored athlete, but I never turned professional with any sport I played. So then I saw this ambassadorship program, was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, how do you become an ambassador? And I remember thinking, like, that would be such a dream. Like, what a dream to be able to be just an ordinary person and not a professional athlete, and have somebody, like, be a representative for a company like this. And that was well before I was teaching yoga or even doing yoga, really. And so when I started to connect with Lululemon, I had caught wind that they wanted to bring me on as an ambassador. I was like, oh my God, like, how did this happen? I thought it was like a pipe dream. But yeah, so it felt like a pipe dream when it first crossed my mind many, many years ago. And it's pretty special to me to be an ambassador now.
Yeah, no, it's so cool. And like I said in my email, I worked on and off for Lululemon for a couple of years. So I've been a part of like a lot of different ambassadors coming on for the store in Banff. And it's always so cool when you ask somebody to be an ambassador and see how stoked they are to represent that brand that you work for. And it's really cool to hear like that was a goal for you, and that, it's really exciting for you to be a part of that community.
It is really exciting because it is such a positive community, and, amongst the ambassadors, but also amongst, employees of the company. It's very positive, and people are so supportive of one another, and everybody celebrates one another's successes. It's not a competitive scenario. There's never, all the people I've ever encountered through Lululemon, there's never been like a matter of stepping upon each other to climb higher. It's everybody's in it together. Everybody is working for the common good. Everybody is in it supporting one another as best they can.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And people are just doing such amazing things. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, something that I loved about working for the store, much more than just like selling stretchy pants, is how it's a brand that's able to bring people together. And, when somebody comes in, especially like working in Banff, somebody who come in and like they're curious about the photos on the wall, and then it's like, I get to talk about this like really amazing yoga teacher that offers this really cool class, and, encourage somebody to go try that person. And it's a fun thing from both perspectives, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. It's very cool.
And so you teach at 2 different studios in Calgary, and then you also run retreats and trainings outside of that. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So I teach at Yoga Passage, which is on the Beltline in Calgary. And then I also teach at Junction 9, which is in Inglewood, where I live. So that's very convenient for me.
Yeah.
And then out of Junction 9, I run the 200-hour teacher training program. That's the same teacher training program that I've run in BC, as well as Mexico, and I hope to be doing another away training in the coming years, coming couple of years. But mainly for my travel, work and travel right now, I've started doing cycling and yoga retreats.
Cool.
In Mexico. Very, very cool combination. Cycling is my second love. Yoga is my first, but cycling is close behind. So it's really nice for me to pull those together. It just has a completely different vibe to it than a pure yoga retreat. Both are amazing, but the cycling just has a different vibe to it. And then I'm also doing with Jelaine from Junction 9. She and I are partnering to do a retreat in Ucluelet this summer over Stampede because we want to get out of town for Stampede. So we're doing a week-long retreat or 5-day retreat in Ucluelet during that period. So just trying to be able, to work and travel and combine those, all the things that I love together, because I feel like if I love them, other people love them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those are probably the 2 things that I'm most passionate about. So you're definitely not alone there. And I know that I've talked to tons of yogis who are also super passionate about seeing the world. I'm curious. Mm-hmm. It seems like you've really been able to expand your personal brand or your business with your yoga quite well, even though you don't, I guess, have formal training in business. And I'm curious, what sort of things have you learned through running these retreats over time, or running workshops and teacher trainings and that sort of thing?
From a business point of view?
Yeah.
I think, one thing I know is that every group is different. Every group dynamic is going to be different. So I try to do as much planning ahead of time as possible, but there's always a clause in the back of my mind that knows that I have to be adaptable and be ready to adapt the moment that I arrive and see the group that I'm working with. And being, especially with retreats, being able to cater to what people want on their retreat, because they're there for an experience. And so to me, I'm it's my job to deliver that experience as best I can. And so I try to be as adaptable as I can within reason, because there's certain things that if I start to sway and be adaptable in some in areas and shift things around because certain people want things a certain way, there's also the other people in the group who want to stay with what was set out ahead of time. So there's you have to be adaptable within reason and then still hold true to the objectives that you had clearly put out ahead of time in your advertisement or your marketing, right? I try to when I pick locations for retreats, right now we're facing a really hard time in the economy. People don't have the money that they did 3 years ago, right? Money to spend. And so, but that doesn't mean that people aren't, there are people that are still able to go away and do retreats or, take time off, or they still want to have a chance to de-stress and to have these retreats from day-to-day life because they need them. And so I try to make it so that I try to find places where it's affordable. So it's affordable, but not not taking away from the quality of service. So some of our places are luxury, but they're catering to people who are looking strictly for luxury. But then on the other side, I've had retreats where they're not as luxurious and they are much more affordable and approachable, and they're great fun. So I'm trying to have a variety in the different pricing tiers and the different, like the variety of like luxury to maybe a little bit more like rugged accommodations, so that there's something for everybody to be choosing from. As far as teacher trainings go, I think the reason why my teacher trainings have been successful is, I don't know, I'm kind of shy about talking about this. I have a good program, I guess. I've worked on it for like quite a few years now, and I'm continually trying to make it stronger and to have teachers come out feeling well-rounded and able and ready to step in front of a room of people and teach a class that they're proud of and a class that they've created themselves versus, a class that, like Ashtanga is a set sequence, set series. It's a fantastic practice, but that's not the style that I teach. So I really want people to be set up so they can tap into their own creativity. And I think that's a draw for people.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
And then also like teaming with a studio like Junction 9 and having, a community like on board with me rather than me as a standalone individual. I'm not there yet to be a standalone individual in promoting my teacher trainings, which is fine. I like having a community and I like having that family feeling to come home to when I walk into a yoga studio.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's like all really good advice for people to hear. I think it's also, you kind of just hit on it with the last thing you said. I love, like, something that I really love about like the podcast and the people that I get to talk to is getting to kind of know how people have built their careers up in different ways, but seeing so many people who are, they mean so much to the people in their community. So it's like, maybe you're not like a massive yoga celebrity or whatever, and not on the cover of Yoga Journal, but like you make a difference to people's lives every single day when you show up and you teach them. And I think that's so amazing.
Well, I think it's really important to like realize, and I talk to my teacher trainees about this, is like students will look to teachers like the teacher is the one that's making the difference. And they'll be like, oh my God, your class is so amazing. You've changed my life. But to like really turn it back onto the students and say like, no, you're doing that for yourself. We're here just as facilitators. Mm-hmm. And to like have that recognition of we're facilitators. We're there. Yes, we're there helping you along, but you're the one that's showing up on your mat every day. And to like, to respect that relationship with your students, that they are the ones, like as much as we as teachers make a difference in our students' lives, students are huge. Like they're teachers themselves, right? So like they're what inspire me to go in to the studio every day. Like, yes, I love teaching. Yes, I love moving on my mat. I can do that in my house. Mm-hmm. But it's students that pull me back into the studio every day, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really interesting. Something that I didn't really expect when I first started teaching was how much I learn what I teach from the people who are in the room.
Totally. And not just about the asana practice, but about like myself and like how sometimes somebody will like push one of my buttons and like, oh, okay, there's something to look at there. Okay, I have something to work on.
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And so what's sort of like next for you in terms of your career? Are you pretty happy with where you're at, or what are sort of like your goals in the future?
I'm definitely happy with where I'm at, but it's not it for me. like I'm very, very happy with like where things have progressed to, but I would like to be traveling. I would like to have a schedule that is set up yearly where I'm traveling, 5-6 times a year for retreats or festival or more, within reason, because I still need balance in my life. Mm-hmm. But I would like to be teaching at festivals. I'm teaching at festivals here in Western Canada, and I'll be in Winnipeg in January. But I would really like to be teaching. I would love to teach at Wanderlust. That would be amazing for me. I think that would be just such a special experience. So that is definitely a huge goal for me, is to teach at Wanderlust. I want to continue to build the teacher training program and the teacher training offerings that I have. I think in the next couple of years is also going to be a lot about me doing trainings as well, and furthering my own skills and clarifying, like bringing more clarity and potency to the message that I'm offering. And again, that's not just in the asana practice, because I love vinyasa practice. I love sequencing, but I want there to be more depth to the message that I'm delivering. And that's just like, that's a lifelong study, right? And this past year I started doing lecturing specifically on manifestation, and that's been pulled out of talking a lot about that topic in my teacher trainings. So it just, I was asked to do a lecture at the Banff Yoga Festival this past year. And so that lecture then was picked up by Camp Yoga, and then picked up by Bloom Festival. And then I actually gave that lecture in Europe, in London this fall. So I really like the lecturing side of things. I'm really surprised by that, but I really, really love the lecturing because it forces me also to do my homework and get really clear on the message that I want to put out there. And it provokes people to think and to come up with their own ideas and to examine their own lives. And that is incredible to watch those lights go on and that light go on in the light. So I think, more like retreats, more travel, really develop the cycling and yoga thing. Oh, and I'm also doing, I'm going with a group called Inspire Sport to Cuba this February.
Oh, cool.
And it's a really cool foundation that they've started. Last year I taught with Jolene at Junction 9, we taught a fundraiser class for them. So they fundraise and gear raise sports equipment for like triathletes, so running, biking, running, cycling, swimming. And so we fundraise gear for them to take down to Cuba and give to athletes in Cuba. So I bike ride with one of the founders who's a legacy ambassador with Lululemon. His name is Raf Lopez. So he asked me to join them this year and offer yoga to the athletes. So I'll be going with them in February. And Lululemon has stepped in and supported us with our travel. But I'd really like to help build that program so that there is a legacy element left behind in Cuba that will grow in the yoga scene, in furthering the education about yoga and how applicable it is to athletes, not just on a physical front, but also on the mental health front.
Yeah, that's really neat.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like you have so many amazing things kind of on the horizon for you, which is so cool to hear. I think the thing that's like I keep coming back to in my mind is how you said, like, I'm not really I don't really have much background in business. I'm not really business minded. And I feel like if I look at your entire yoga brand that you've created for yourself and your yoga business, it seems like you're very successful in terms of the business side of it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Do you feel like that just comes from passion?
I think that it like an enormous part of it comes from passion. Absolutely. If I was running a spin studio, it may have not been as successful, right? Like, I love outdoor cycling, and I do indoor cycling just to stay in outdoor cycling shape. But yeah, like, I love yoga. I really, really live and breathe it, and it's in every piece of my life. And so it's really easy for me to stay up till midnight working. It's very easy for me to get up in the morning and go to work. I was in Europe this fall for a month, and about 2.5 weeks in, I was like, oh, no, I'm kind of ready to go back to work. And everybody I tell that to, they're like, what is your problem? Like, did you not like Europe? I'm like, no, I loved it. Don't get me wrong, but I wanted to use my brain in that way again, and I crave that work. And so I think, sure, if I would have gone to business school and been formally educated in this, then there's certainly a possibility that I would be even more successful in the business side of things. But then there's part of me that's like, or would that have clouded my intuition and instinct? Because I do very much feel, I try to, and I feel like for the most part I do make my choices based on my instinct. And I feel like it's clear because of what I do. I'm in the yoga studio every day. I'm practicing my own self. I try to practice every day. And so when you're constantly aligning, and this goes for anybody, if you're constantly aligning with yoga, you're constantly going to be aligning with life. And that's like that, then you align into happiness. And that really is the measure of success, right?
Cool. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's so amazing to hear. I'm really inspired by your story. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Oh, thank you for letting me talk your ear off.
Yeah, of course. Do you have any other pieces of advice that you'd want to share with somebody listening who's maybe new to teaching, or maybe is just looking for, I don't know, some other pieces of advice?
I think that if you're new to teaching, if you're teaching, period, is that you have to hustle, but you also have to take care of yourself. And so work and take up jobs that are offered to you, especially in the early years. I said yes to everything. And even, we were talking previously about how there's so many things where we think we should do something. To me, those were the situations where I'm like, there was plenty of times where honestly, where I was like, I'm tired, but this means so much to me. And going forward means so much to me. So I'm going to say yes to every teaching opportunity I get, because I know I have to build this momentum despite how tired I might be at times. And so there was a real hustle required. And where I think people go wrong is where they hit the point and where they will convince themselves that, well, it doesn't quite feel right to go and take this teaching job. And sometimes, yeah, it's not right. And sometimes that instinct is correct. But sometimes you're just tired. And sometimes you need to keep pushing and check in with, is this taking me further along my path? Am I on the right path? And sometimes it is a matter of saying no to certain asks. But hustle and then scale back when you can. So now I don't teach nearly as many public classes as I did in the first 4 years of teaching. First 2 years I was teaching something like 22 classes a week, and
wow.
Part-time job and run a studio at the same time. It was crazy. And
that is crazy.
Back, oh my God, what was I doing? But I had fire in me at that time. I was lit up. I knew that this is what I wanted to do. And I knew that I knew it was what I was meant to do. And so I had to work. I had to work at it. And so once the foundation became stronger and stronger, then there's now the room for me to pull back and say no when I have to, or find somebody else to do the job that I think would be suitable. And for me, a huge part of this is like coming home and spending time by myself, being quiet, having balance in my social life, having balance in my work life, but also having a lot of balance in my personal life, and like eating well, sleeping well, really taking care of myself. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable. If you find that you're unhappy and those are the things, if you're lacking in areas of your life, that's when you're going to find yourself unhappy. And when you find yourself unhappy, you have to look at what you're doing. And sometimes it might mean saying, no, I'm not a yoga teacher, but I love yoga. You know, it's not for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's such an important thing for people to remember, especially if you're like fresh out of your teacher training and, you know, maybe you want to teach, but then you go into it and it doesn't really like sit right with you, or there's things you don't like about it. Yeah, I love hustle, but take care of yourself. That's awesome.
It's so important.
Yeah.
So important. And then, like, I think it's something, like, speaking about teachers who, about people, like, because I've had people come into teacher training and they're like, well, I don't know if I want to teach. And whether they come out of the training or not wanting to teach, or sorry, if they come out of the training wanting to teach or not, is kind of irrelevant, because even if you're not meant to be a yoga teacher on the level of asana, when you develop the skills and you go into that learning, into learning about yoga and the philosophy and the methods, and you do become a teacher, even if it's not in a yoga studio. You become a teacher in your day-to-day life, in your home, because you start to act differently. You start to respond differently. Your perspective shifts. And that is what teaches people. It's not about the asana practice necessarily, right? So teach outside of the studio.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. What. Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice for people to hear, for sure. And so where can people go to find more about you?
Well, if they want to peek into more of my personal life, my Instagram account is a mix of yoga and then just like silly things. So that's just at Randelle Lusk. And then my website is randellelusk.com.
Cool. And then for anyone who's in the Calgary area, you're at Yoga Passage and Junction 9?
Yes, that's right.
And then you'll be at the Banff Yoga Festival this upcoming year as well?
Yeah. So this year I'll be at Banff Yoga Festival, the Prana Yoga Festival here in Calgary, the Snowflake Festival in Winnipeg, and I think that might be it.
Amazing. Cool. So lots of places for people to find you. And I'll put links for like your website and that sort of thing on the show notes so that people can find you super easily.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been amazing talking to you.
It's really fun to talk about this stuff. I enjoy it. Especially with somebody who knows about yoga.
Yeah, definitely. It's always a better conversation when you're kind of not like trying to sell yoga. You can just like have a conversation about it.
Totally.
All right. So there's the interview with Randelle. I hope that all of you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed recording it with her. She was so fun to talk to. So definitely check her out if you're going to be in one of the areas where she's teaching, particularly Calgary or the surrounding area for festivals. And you can check out her website. There'll be a link on the show notes at www.mbomyoga.com. You can sign up for the newsletter on the website. So www.mbomyoga.com/newsletter, and join the community on social media. So on Facebook and Instagram, it's /mastering the business of yoga. As always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.